And we're back on Consumer Choice Radio. I have the pleasure of introducing our next guest. She is the Member of Parliament for Calgary Nose Hill, the Honourable Michelle Rempel Garner. Thank you very much for joining us on Consumer Choice Radio.
Thanks for having me.
So you introduced a bill, and I will say this in a cheeky way, but most of the time when bills are introduced, it's not necessarily great news for consumers. But this was a forward-looking bill that was looking at how cryptocurrency and the ecosphere around that should be regulated. And so right off the top, what was the inspiration towards trying to start that conversation at the legislative level?
So the bill addresses crypto assets in general, and frankly, this is a massively growing new economy that is transforming so many parts of the world in that space, and it's imperative that Canada is an attractive place for innovators with regard to crypto investment. So the bill itself doesn't prescribe any regulations. It actually doesn't prescribe anything outside to work with provinces, with industry, with others to do two things: put together a federal framework that would incent the growth of the sector, but at the same time also ensure that protections for those who are working in the space exist. And when I was talking to people, innovators, end users, about what was needed in Canada to make this happen, there was really no consensus on what those policy items were, but there was consensus that we needed to start the conversation. And I've gotten amazing feedback on it. So this is really about making sure that Canada isn't behind, that we're not, like we sometimes are wont to do in this country, lagging behind, and that it's a constructive place for investment to occur.
And what personally sort of excites you about this sector, or what do you think is the most innovative about it?
You know, we often talk in Canada about moving beyond just a natural resources, agriculture-based economy. Obviously, those are very important parts of the Canadian economy that need to continue. But if we're looking at growth in new industrial sectors, crypto assets is a no-brainer. I mean, just think about the amount of investment that's happening in cryptocurrencies alone, never mind by anything on a blockchain, really. Why wouldn't Canada be the place to do business on this? That's really that's how I look at this question. Think about the jobs that could be created. Think about Canada being a positive disruptive force in so many different industries. It should be us. Do you know what I mean? Why shouldn't it be us? But I have heard from many people that because Canada really hasn't had this discussion in Parliament or sort of in a coordinated positive way across provincial governments as well too, that is becoming a concern. What are the factors needed for growth? And because that hasn't happened, and frankly, I'm going to say a lot of legislators, a lot of public servants have no idea what we're talking about, talking about crypto assets. We have to start somewhere. So this is the first bill that's ever been of its kind, it's ever been addressed in Canada. So it's a firm stake in the ground.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when we follow the headlines on crypto, it's almost always like, oh, this nefarious funding or the Freedom Convoy and Bitcoin. And prior to yourself, we had Justin Ling on talking about conspiracy theories, and we dipped into Bitcoin a little bit. And it's like, well, at the same time, I sent Bitcoin directly to the Ukrainian treasury so that they could help defend themselves. Now, it was pretty modest, but it was an ability to send, and this is where I compare it to like the banking sector. It's, if you compare us to the United States, it's very difficult to send money. Like something like Venmo doesn't exist in Canada, and there are probably all sorts of reasons for that. How much do you think headlines will maybe drive some of this discussion, or does your bill maybe step ahead of that and say, okay, let's get the people who know what they're talking about in the room first, and rather than reacting to hysteria, let's have a more adult conversation.
Exactly. And I'm going to give you an analogy on why I think this bill is so important. I have seen examples in the past where an industry has become politically polarized, and that polarization has actually stopped growth. It's actually stopped other public policy objectives. And that the example that I'm going to give you is the oil and gas sector, right? So rather than talking about the role of the sector with regard to climate change policy or energy security, and having, partisan nuance around those policies, the industry itself is a politically polarized vehicle. And we need to avoid that polarization with crypto assets. So I would hope that every party could agree to a bill that would bring experts in the room, that would talk about what the role of crypto assets are going to be in the Canadian economy, and then go from there in terms of, okay, perhaps partisan divide on how to approach different policies. But right now, you're so right, David, that I hate to see headlines polarizing an industry itself, particularly one that has such an incredible capacity for growth and job creation in Canada, which is, again, to just re-emphasize that, natural resources and agriculture-based economy for the most part.
Yeah, I could definitely see for a lot of the new immigrants, for a lot of people, remittances are very important, and being able to use, cryptocurrencies instead of Western Union or any of these other companies, that's a huge leg up. And we're talking about saving people, large amounts of money per month that they can send back to their families. I only see that as a positive thing.
I mean, again, the applications of crypto assets are only bounded by innovation, imagination at this point in time, right? Like, I mean, we could spend like 12 hours just going through a million different cool things that are happening that I think are really transformative and wonderful. I mean, I actually get really excited about this stuff. So again, I really think that it's important for Parliament and for different legislatures to be looking at this area as a positive force for economic growth. Yeah, we might need to be discussing what protections are needed for people working in the space, but at the end of the day, I want people who are actually working in the space to be driving the bus on that, so that it's not a government bureaucrat or a legislator who really doesn't understand the power and perhaps the disruptive force, a positive disruptive force that this sector brings, to be just coming in with a heavy hand because of negative political connotations on one group or another, as opposed to looking at the industry holistically.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I also see some parallels. These are my own biases. I also see some parallels in terms of how cannabis is regulated in this country. My own view, insanely overregulated, and I feel like a lot of those decisions were sometimes made in the context of folks who maybe had no real exposure to what the industry was or could be, or what other legal markets looked like. So it's great to hear that conversation will get started as parliamentarians debate your bill and hopefully the passing of it and everything that comes with it. I did want to shift gears. Obviously, if you're on Twitter these days and you are following the Conservative Party leadership candidates, the gloves are officially off. It has been a feisty week, to say the least. I won't go ahead and ask you whom you're going to endorse, but I will ask you what you think the qualities that the leader of the Conservative Party needs to have. What makes a conservative leader something that's palatable to the general public in a way that offers some sort of vision as an alternative to the Trudeau government?
I do feel that we need a change in government in Canada, given the a massive amount of debt that we have, lack of forward-looking future for the Canadian economy, lack of cohesive vision for Canada on the world stage, given the instability of the world. We need a change in government, and I believe it should be a conservative government. 3 elections now where we've lost. And as a Calgary area MP, my community really needs to see a change in government in order to have any sort of economic hope going forward. So for me, one of the key attributes is, can this candidate really win in parts of the country where we need to gain seats? Frankly, like Mississauga, like Etobicoke, like Brampton, like the GTA. I've campaigned. I'm one of the, I think one of the few Western Canadian MPs that always campaigns in the GTA, campaigns. And like the last elections, we just have not been competitive on issues like sensitivity around cultural communities, on issues related to women's equality, and frankly on rights of the LGBT community. So for me, it has to be a leader who has credibility on those issues and is not going to be dragged through the mud by the Liberals to the point where we are unelectable at a time where we desperately, absolutely need to change in government. So for me, it's who can win. And I think that's going to be the ballot question for a lot of Conservatives, is who can form government. At the same time, not sacrificing the principles that the Conservative Party stands for, many of which we've talked about today during the course of the interview on other things. So that's what I'm looking for. I want to win.
Yeah, and it will certainly be an interesting, as someone who observes politics, it will be interesting to see how this unfolds, because despite the stress involved with them, they can be quite entertaining. But like you said, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake.
I wish they weren't entertaining.
Yes.
I wish they were just focused on the issue, but I guess that's boring, right?
Yeah, very good point. One other follow-up. We have just a few minutes left here. Another op-ed that you wrote recently, which I was particularly fond of, was on the hysteria of the World Economic Forum and some of the, in my opinion, nonsense that we've seen put out by folks about the control of the World Economic Forum. Walk our listeners through what your perspective is there. And I say this with the backstory that Yael and I, one of the first episodes of the show that we recorded was actually from the World Economic Forum. And when I see people talk about controlling governments, it's like, oh, the World Economic Forum is a lot of things. It's not what you think it is. But
yeah.
I'm curious to hear your take.
Well, I guess I would start with this. Canadians have lost a lot of control over their lives over the last couple of years. Pandemic restrictions, I think, have left the country, again, across political stripe, with a lot of very frustrated and rightly frustrated people about asking questions about the ability of Canada's democracy to truly represent views to be heard. A lot of nastiness in politics, where if you raise your voice that might not be on an issue that might not be mainstream, that you're called a pejorative as opposed to dealing with that. And I think that there are justifiable concerns, but what that's sort of fertile ground for conspiracy theories around groups like the World Economic Forum. I've never been a member of the World Economic Forum. They gave me an award, I think, like 6-7 years ago.
Yep.
And so I've been the subject of a lot of these conspiracy theories. But from my experience, I went to one of their conferences. This is it's a left-wing think tank that puts out, I think, some kind of crackers papers that I don't agree with, a lot of what they put out. But so I'm a federal conservative. So saying that I would all of a sudden be influenced by a left-wing think tank, it's kind of preposterous. And what I wrote in that article was a lot of what the World Economic Forum has put forward over the last year and a half is policy that the Liberal Party of Canada put in their election platforms in 2015 and in 2019. So, the Canadian government Canadian people elected a government that was already standing for some of these things before the World Economic Forum frankly ripped them off. I think where a lot of people give credit to this theory is that the leader of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, made an incredibly boneheaded, dumb move in saying, falsely bragging that he controlled the cabinets of around the world. I mean, just irresponsible. I've gotten on the phone with the World Economic Forum and been like, this was how can anybody be associated with this group when you're saying that you control people? It's just this stupid brag that's ridiculous. But it's all of this stuff that comes together to give just enough proof points that people find this stuff believable. And my appeal to the Canadian public would be, yes, we need to have politicians that listen to us and don't dismiss concerns, but we also need to critically think about what information is being presented to us online. And frankly, I get it. It's a lot easier for people to think that, Canada is failing at a government level due to some sort of shadowy world organization, as opposed to our own politicians screwing up. So we all need to do better.
Wonderfully put. Michelle Rempel Garner, it has been a pleasure. I'm sure we will have to have you back on the program
Thanks.
soon.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.